Things have been a little crazy here at Mo Sounds the past few months. I've turned everything completely upside down. I sold my API console. I pretty much got rid of everything in the control room and started fresh. I decided to do a full Dolby Atmos speaker system and got a brand new interface. So lots of changes and lots of problems initially. I'm really happy with the Audient Aurea interface I decided to go with. It's got enough analog inputs for me to track right now, but the biggest issue with the Aurea is that it has no additional analog outputs. It does have the ability to expand via Dante, and I think that's going to be the route I'm going to go at some point, but it's going to be a little while before I can do that. So right now, I'm a little screwed because I do not have any analog outputs besides the speaker outputs on the interface. So I can't reamp to anything in the live room. I can't send anything to outboard gear. So big problem. But fortunately, I saw that Freqport came out with this new box called the FreqInOut. It's a 4 I/O unit that is completely bus powered. It's USB, and you basically just plug it in and it becomes an extension to your interface that allows you to do 4 channels of analog inserts or IO via a plugin in your DAW. So you just bring up a plugin, plug stuff into the FreqInOut box, and then you can interface it in a lot of cool ways with the FreqInOut plugin. So let's take a look at that. First thing you need to do when you bring out the FreqInOut plugin is you need to select a key input up at the top. I've selected the first input on the Audient Aurea, and that's just helping the interface to help determine latency and everything, so everything's syncing up correctly. You've got sends at the top and return at the bottom so that you can send out hotter or, quieter to a unit, and then return, you can set that as well. That's great for gain staging and level matching. It's also really useful, as you'll see on some units like my Heritage Grandchild. I like hitting that pretty hard sometimes, but there's no analog output on that compressor, so there's no way to turn it down so that you're not clipping your converters. So it's great to have that on some units that don't have an output control, but mostly, I just appreciate it for gain staging so that you can level match stuff. It's also got the ability to do a wet and dry mix, which is really useful. Again, I'll use the Heritage Grandchild as an example that we'll hear in a minute. I think it can be a little too aggressive on the mix bus at some times, and I always wish it had a wet dry mix on it. And I don't have to worry about that anymore. You can add wet dry with any hardware unit with the FreqInOut plugin. Also got mid sides at the press of a button. I know a lot of people have complained about wanting some affordable way to be able to do MS in the hardware realm. Really simple and affordable way to do that with FreqInOut. I think a lot of people are going to find it worth, the price of admission just to have the MS option. So when you bring up the plugin initially, come up here to the global hardware configuration. Got some deep dives, things we'll go into a little bit later. There's some advanced options with a phase flip and a time delay. This page is important because you basically just need to decide how you're going to use the unit on each session. Let's say we have a stereo compressor that I'm going to put on the master bus. I need to link channels 1 and 2 up here and then activate port 1, and that becomes my stereo port. Everything's set up and ready to go at that point. The last really, really great option that the plugin has is a way to visually recall stuff. You can take pictures. So let's say a few days ago, I took a picture of my Heritage Grandchild compressor so that I could look on my phone and bring it back up. Can actually do this on the FreqInOut. It's got the ability to add pictures to each plugin you have in your session. So let's go ahead and trash that. Comes up with a QR code. Just take your phone, take a picture of the QR code, and it'll bring up a web page that says upload an image to appear in the plugin. So I'm going to do that. Let's choose a file. I'm going to go to my photo library. There's the picture of my grandchild. And then it's going to say upload. So let's upload it. We'll wait a second. Boom. And there it is. Pops right into the plugin. Couldn't be more simpler. Also lets you crop in on things. So let's crop in on that picture just a little bit. And then we're going to apply crop. And now you've got a picture of your hardware that'll pop up every time you open that plugin in your session. It's also got, where is it? There's the zoom in. It's got the ability to zoom in on stuff as well if you really need to get in and see exactly where things are. Grandchild's going to be pretty easy to recall because everything's fairly detented. Yeah, I think that covers most of the features. Let's get into the fun stuff. Before we start hearing sound samples, though, let's dive into some tests to hear how it sounds, because it is an analog digital box. It's got conversion in it. So I know a lot of people seem to be concerned about that. I'll just tell you right off the bat that sounds fine to me. Like, I'm not hearing anything. This was actually the first test that I did some phase tests right when I got this box, because right when I got it from the company, when they sent it to me to check out, I told myself, okay, if I start using this and it doesn't sound good or it sounds weird, like, I'm not even going to bother with it. It sounds great to me. I wouldn't be using it if it sounded bad. So let's take a look at some tests, and then we'll get that out of the way and we'll do some fun stuff. I'd initially planned on having a longer, more in-depth segment right here where I kind of dived into how the FreqInOut box sounded from a technical perspective and how the conversion sounded. I have gone back and forth on this so many times trying to decide how to do this, and I've decided to just make a decision and approach this a lot more practically, because that's kind of how I ended up making the decision of what I thought the unit sounded like and if the conversion was, good. I've done some phase tests where I just did some straight passes going out of it and right back in, and kind of did some phase tests with white noise compared to the digital pass, and did that a few times, and they cancel out almost completely. Not completely, but the issue with trying to do phase tests like this with white noise or anything is that no matter what interface you have or how expensive it is, when you record a round trip ADDA thing with white noise or something, and then you do a phase test with the digital file, they're never going to cancel out completely, no matter what interface you have. And so I thought about this a bit, and I don't see the point of going through all of that with you and showing you, yeah, look, I did a phase test and they cancel out almost completely, but not completely. That doesn't help anyone. I feel like I'm just stirring the pot. What I ended up doing when I first got the unit was I did a couple of tests where I ran a mix through the FreqInOut, just straight through with no hardware, just to do a round trip, recording through the box, brought it back in, and then I did a couple of edits where I took the digital file and then the pass through the FreqInOut, and I did a bunch of edits so that they were going back and forth between each other, went back and forth. I can't hear a difference. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play that file for you in a second. It's going to be like a 20-second segment of a mix I did, and it's going to just randomly, I'm not going to tell you when those points are, but it's randomly going to go back and forth between the digital file and the one that passed through the FreqInOut. And I'm probably going to do 20 edits on that file so that they're really quick in a lot of random spots. And I don't think anyone's going to hear the difference. I certainly can't hear the difference. And when I did that test, I said, okay, good enough for me. Let's actually start using this. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to really obsess about adding, a cheaper interface to do analog inserts with your really nice interface, if you're going to obsess about that and it's going to bother you all the time, I don't think it's going to be a good choice. Do I think it sounds bad? No, I think it sounds great. And like I said, I honestly cannot hear a difference when I'm going back and forth on a lot of these tests. I couldn't. So that's good enough for me. I don't want to stir the pot by just throwing up a bunch of technical sound bites and saying, well, here you are, kids, have fun. I think at some point maybe someone will do a more in-depth test. I don't want to be that guy. I wanted to just approach this very practically and say, how does the unit sound? I think it sounds pretty damn transparent. I think a lot of you weren't around in the dark ages of the late 90s and early 2000s where conversion really sucked. I'm a child of that era. That's when I started doing recording. There's just some bad stuff back then. I think we are extremely spoiled in this day and age with some of the conversion that we have that's very cheap. So it's not the most expensive box. There is conversion involved. I cannot hear a difference. That's good enough for me. And I'm going to move on and I'm going to start making music because we're not sending people to the moon. No one's going to die. The music's going to sound great. So I'm not worried about it. I'm going to play the snippet for you and we're just going to move on. Sorry if that pisses you off and you wanted something more extensive. I just honestly don't know how to approach this. And I really don't want to be the guy that just throws out a bunch of random crap and again says, here you go, have fun with it. If you want my opinion, I think it sounds great. Doesn't bother me. I'm going to move on and make some music. So let's hear that and then we'll get to the fun stuff.
Might sound crazy, I know this ain't easy. Looking in from the outside, it always takes guns and some gasoline to make a change. Why do we call?
I think a good practical starting point would be just with a compressor over the master bus. For this example, I'm going to use the Heritage Grandchild. It's a Fairchild style compressor that Heritage, through a bunch of voodoo, managed to cram into a 500 series enclosure. I absolutely love it for tracking. It's been really good. On master bus, however, there's two things that have always bugged me a little bit. Number one, you usually have to drive into the unit pretty hard or turn up the level on the unit significantly to get it to trigger well at lower threshold levels that I think work on a master bus well. So usually by the time I'm hitting it well in the analog world, the output end is way too hot for digital. So because you have a lot of headroom in analog, when I still had my API console, that was an extremely easy workaround. I just threw it on the inserts of two of the summing side faders on the summing section that are super clean. I'd throw it up on there, stomp the input on the grandchild and get the level that I wanted, and then just compensate by turning down the faders. Harder to do in the digital realm when you don't have an analog console. So all of these things that kind of irk me about the grandchild are easily solvable with the FreqInOut hardware and the plugin. Another thing is you can always also do a wet and dry mix and kind of blend between the two, which on master bus, sometimes when I get a little aggressive with it, every once in a while sound like it's just kicking in a little too much. So I always wish that the grandchild had a wet dry kind of blend for the compression. It doesn't, but thankfully the FreqInOut does. So we can solve all those problems with the FreqInOut plugin in the hardware. So let's set this up real quick. I've already set up a key input to trigger it right. So next thing we're going to do is come up to the global hardware config. We're going to link those two channels since it's a stereo unit. We're going to activate port 1. And then we should be getting level to the grandchild. Let's take a look.
Might sound crazy, I know this ain't easy. Looking.
Perfect. So it's all triggering correctly. Everything's set up. Start setting some levels on the grandchild.
Might sound crazy, I know this ain't easy. Looking in from the outside. Oh.
So here's a perfect example about what I was talking about in terms of gain staging into this. At this point, I've got the threshold all the way up on the unit, but it's still not triggering enough. And you kind of play around between the threshold and the DC threshold to kind of figure out if you want to compress more or limit more. So I'm starting to trigger it into limit mode where it limits a little more than it compresses. It needs more level. So I could obviously just come over here and turn up the input gain. You can see that it's triggering a lot better. Or since we have input and output on the plugin for the FreqInOut, can just leave it there for a more simple recall, and I can push into the unit with a plugin. Let's take a look.
From the outside, it always takes guns and some gasoline. Might sound crazy, I know this ain't easy. Looking in from the
Okay, so perfect. So just in terms of just, it might just be, helping my ADD and just having things at noon for easy recall. Who knows? That's a mystery for the ages. But I'm going to leave the hardware with the gain at 12 o'clock because it doesn't bug my craziness as much. And we compensated by just driving into the input of the compressor with the FreqInOut plugin. And then, as you saw, I was able to turn down the return. So we went into it 7 dB hotter. We returned quieter at 7 dB. So they're level matched. Take a listen.
always takes guns and some gasoline. Might sound crazy, I know this ain't easy. Look.
Perfect. So because we've gained stage correctly, and I'm able to A/B with and without the compression at a steady level, which is very important. Sometimes our brains get tricked when we do things louder. Most of us, no matter how long we've been doing this, if we hear something that's louder, we perceive it as being better. So very easy to accurately gain stage in and out of things with the FreqInOut plugin. Now, take a listen to it again. I've intentionally kind of gone into the grandchild a little too hot to where I'm kind of hearing that compression pump a little too much. Let's take a listen.
From the outside, it always takes guns and some gasoline.
Okay, so we're definitely cooking into the compression a little too much. Let's try to utilize the wet-dry blend to see if we can blend in some dry signal to kind of get rid of that pumping effect, but still get more of a noticeable compression, not just to handle transients, but just to, glue things together and add some weight and color.
Looking in from the outside, it always takes guns and some gasoline. Might sound crazy, no.
Okay, so we backed off significantly. We've got about a 40% blend of the wet in there. Let's listen, bypass a few times, and see how that sounds.
Might sound crazy, no, this ain't easy. Looking.
That's a little better, but it still just sounds like too much. So let's just leave the controls as they are on the hardware unit. I'm just going to use the plugin on the FreqInOut to back off on the input a little bit and then compensate on the output.
Looking in from the outside, it always takes guns and some gasoline. Might sound crazy, no, this ain't easy. Looking in from the outside, it always takes guns and some gas.
Okay, that's not bad for just messing around for a minute or two. I'm kind of hearing a gluing effect that I really like from the compressor. We're not so much at this point using it as like a transient, shaper or to tame transients. This is more of a color box at this point, which I think, Fairchild compressors kind of excel at. So at this point, we're just getting a little compression. I've utilized the wet and dry. We've driven in and out of the unit and compensated with the FreqInOut to kind of level match everything. So let's A/B between the dry signal and the compressed signal one more time.
Might sound crazy, no, this ain't easy. Looking in from the outside.
not bad. I'm digging it. I'd probably tweak a little bit more as I started mixing the song. A lot of times I'm not sending finished mixes through that. I'm setting that up on my master bus from the very beginning, so I'm mixing into it during the whole process. But that was a lot of ways that, we can uniquely utilize the FreqInOut box and the plugin to do some stuff that wouldn't have been as easy unless, you've got an analog console, like how I used to. This is very similar to some of the steps I took that were a lot more complicated to kind of make that compressor work when I had my API console and everything. I can't do that anymore. The console's gone, so the FreqInOut box is, ticking a lot of those boxes and filling in those gaps of, things I couldn't necessarily do without the FreqInOut, just going right into it. Being able to gain stage in and out correctly is really good. And then just, having that wet and dry is really, really great. That's like a make or break it thing for me, because on this song, I think if we went 100% wet with that compressor, I think it would just be a little bit too much. So great, good start. Here's a unique issue I ran into pretty quickly when I first started using the FreqInOut box. This is a matchless dirt box pedal. This is from like the Mark Sampson era, considered like matchless's golden age. You don't see too many of these. They're pretty rare. I think Mark Sampson probably hand built all these. There's only a handful out there. So I really love the dirt box on bass guitar if I need a little bit more aggressive bass sound. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll just track the bass direct in, line in with something, and then split this out to an amp and run it through the dirt box and record them in tandem. A lot of times I'll do it after and just run a line level signal through the dirt box and then kind of blend between them. Because with the FreqInOut box and the plugin, you can actually do a wet dry blend. One of the first things I wanted to see was, well, let's run a bass guitar thing that I recorded, run it through the dirt box, and then blend wet and dry. So let's take a listen to that real quick. So that's the dry signal, just straight bass. Let's add in the dirt box, blend it in a little bit. Okay, I'm hearing some distortion, but something funky is going on. Let's listen again. That's right, folks. Mark Sampson and all his genius wired this dirt box out of phase for some reason. But who are we to question that sort of genius? Maybe he had a good reason for it. Maybe he just got in a hurry. Who knows? I'm not going to be the guy that answers that question today. One of the great things that Freqport added in a more recent update was the ability to go into the extra advanced settings and flip the phase. When I first got this, that option wasn't on there, and I emailed them and said, hey guys, I've got this really weird pedal. It's wired out of phase. I use it a lot. Can we implement some sort of, phase flip inside of the hardware? Because you have to flip the phase on the analog side of things if you're going to utilize the wet dry blend in the plugin. And funny enough, they said, yeah, we're already on it. And within a few days, they had to update and they had implemented the phase flip. So this is probably one of those unique situations where a lot of people won't run into it. But like in this instance, I've just got an old grumpy piece of equipment that sounds awesome that a genius dude wired out of phase for some reason. So let's listen to this real quick when we flip the phase on it. Would help if I actually had the plugin bypass. Let's try one more time. I'm making jokes about geniuses and I'm being an idiot. Go figure. Can hear it get way bigger when you flip the phase. So awesome. Cool. Another problem solved with a quick update from Freqport. So that's great. I just want people to know that that's in the advanced section. If you come over here, I think when the plugin defaults, there's usually, that's hidden. If you just click that little arrow and bring it up, You've got phase, and you've also got a delay trim that we'll talk about later. But yeah, it's a great feature in there because I know probably a lot of people will end up using this with, some weird pieces of gear, and, for whatever reason, you might end up needing to flip phase for a lot of reasons. So just wanted to let everyone know that's in there. One of the really great features of the FreqInOut box is the ability to easily change your stereo signal and split it up into a mid-sides split out. Channel 1 will be mids, channel 2 will be sides. I think this feature alone is probably going to make the FreqInOut, worth the price of admission for a lot of people, because most of the hardware MS options are pretty damn expensive, to be obvious. I see threads on forums all the time for people asking for an affordable hardware mid-sides router. So great choice for this. Really easy to use. Just go down to the bottom. You switch it to mid-sides. Simple. I've got a stereo set of EQs from Heritage Audio, the new Motor City EQs. So 2 mono units. First one's going to be mids. Second one's going to be sides. So let's do some mid-sides EQ stuff to this stereo track.
Might sound crazy, I know this ain't easy. Looking in from the outside, it always takes guns and some gasoline. Might sound crazy, I know this ain't easy. Looking in from the outside, it always takes guns and some gasoline. Might sound crazy, I know this ain't easy. Looking in from the outside.
Okay, I didn't do much. I ended up boosting the low end a bit on the mid signal down the middle, and boosted a little bit of the mids. On the sides, I decided to boost the high end and take out just a little bit of the mids and low mids. So just, having the ability to control the mids and the side EQs is great. One of the great things I love about mid sides is being able to, extend and expand your stereo image by boosting the side signal. The Motor City EQs sound really good when they're pushed. So what I'm actually going to do, I think I'm going to boost the mid signal 4 dB. And then I'm going to boost the side signal 8 dB. So in reality, we're just driving the unit harder, and I'm boosting the sides by 4 dB. So let's see how that sounds.
The outside, it always takes guns and some gasoline. Might sound crazy, I know this ain't easy.
So like I said, we're driving both the EQ units pretty hard because they've got transformers at the end that I think sound really good when they're pushed a bit. So in reality, you can think of it as me just boosting the side signal by 4 dB. But we went up 4 in the middle, 8 on the sides, and then I compensated in the plugin and just brought it down 4 dB to see if that level matches it better. Let's take a look and bypass it a few times.
Might sound crazy, I know this ain't easy. Looking in from the outside, it always takes guns and some gasoline.
I think there's still a little bit of a level mismatch, but it's close. Sounds really good. It's subtle, but we cleared up a little bit of the mud in the signal. And then we just expanded the stereo image a little bit by pushing both channels harder and raising the sides another 4 dB up. So really simple, do some MS stuff. I don't do a whole lot of MS processing during mixing with hardware because it's just a pain in the butt to set up. So might be something I'll start doing more of, since it's a lot easier to do with the FreqInOut box. You press one button. So really cool feature and implementation. All right, let's make an analog tape delay. I've got my Atari tape machine sitting behind me. I'm doing a send through the FreqInOut to the tape machine. Let me show you how I've set all that up inside my DAW. I've got an electric guitar track as a raw mono track, and I'm actually going to do the wet send as an auxiliary track so that it's 100% wet and I can have control over the blend. So I've got the FreqInOut plugin on the auxiliary track, and I'll use that to feed into the tape machine and come back to my DAW through the FreqInOut plugin. Now I've also got a Behringer little mixer that I've had forever. I think that was the first like decent thing I bought when I was like 16 or 17. It saved my butt more than once doing weird stuff like that. So always a good thing to have around. I've got the mixer set up so I can actually feed back into the tape machine so that we can actually have more trails and feed back into the tape machine. That'll make sense in a second. So the great thing about the Atari is that it's got controls to do vary speed on it, so you can actually control the speed that the tape's going. If you look at some of the classic tape delays like an Echoplex, the way they're getting longer delay times was actually physically moving the playback head so that it was distanced from the record head. So the further the playback head moved from the record head, the longer that delay got because it took longer for that recorded signal to get to the playback head. Since we can't move any of the tape heads on a fixed tape machine like this, we're just going to vary the speed, vary speed. We're going to speed it up and down. So I've set it in the 7.5 IPS setting, the lowest, and then we're going to ramp it up and try to lock in on a time. So let's take a listen. Okay, so obviously we're not in time, so you're going to watch me play around with the vary speed until I lock in to something that I feel is appropriate timing-wise. That sounds pretty locked in. We've just got one quick delay going, which is what you'd get if you're using a tape machine like this. Let's feed back into it real quick so we can get some longer delay trails and repeats. So you hear those trails kicking in. That's how we get the repeats on like a normal delay pedal. You take the output of the tape machine and you feed it back into itself. And that's what we've got set up on the Behringer mixer. So we'll listen again. Okay, let's get a little crazy just for fun. Okay, so obviously it's starting to feed back on itself. So if you just want one quick little single tape delay, you can easily do that just feeding to a tape machine and playing with the offset and playing with the speed if you have that ability like I do on my Atari. So unfortunately, I did need to utilize another mixer outside of this, an analog mixer to feed back into the tape machine. You can actually set up a similar thing in Pro Tools. If I was going to come in here, I can't do it right now because I'm recording. Sorry, there's some issues with the OBS screen capture and the FreqInOut plugin. Not worth getting into. But if I wanted to, on that wet auxiliary track, I could actually set up a send to send back into itself and start getting that feedback as well. The problem is if you do that in the digital domain, there's going to be a delay between when the analog signal reaches the machine and when you've got that full ADDA cycle and going back into the machine. You're almost going to end up with like a dotted 8 thing. So one thing that I'm really hoping that Freqport might consider in the future is kind of doing a dedicated plugin that works just for tape, so we can have some options like feedback where inside the mixer you could actually have another option where you could feed that input and output back into themselves, so you could actually get repeats on a tape machine. You'll also see that I'm going to just do some straight passes. I'm going to send some stuff to my tape machine. The way I'm working around that's a simple workaround, but it would also be cool to have some. I know they've included in the latest update, they've included an option where you can actually have a bit of a digital offset to use with like digital delays and stuff that might have an inherent offset in them. I know they've added some options like that, but I think to be able to deal with the offset that you get just by sending to a tape machine, you need some, longer offset options that, go down to the sample to get those right. But we'll dive into that in a minute. But all that to say, I'm really hoping that a lot of us can convince Freqport to maybe think about doing a plugin that's catered just to using the FreqInOut for tape machines, because it can set up some really cool stuff with it. Having the ability to have feedback built into the plugin to route internally, to be able to send back to a tape machine, to be able to do tape delays and not have to use a mixer like that would be really awesome. So I have no idea if they'll do that, but I've been talking to them a bit and I'm pushing them to try to do something like that. So we'll see, but regardless, tape delay, fun stuff. Hopefully they'll be into the idea of doing maybe a dedicated tape plugin or something to work with the FreqInOut, but we'll see. You just saw me set up a bit of a complicated tape delay with my Atari tape machine and the FreqInOut, utilizing an external mixer so that we could do some feedback to go back into the tape machine and get some feedback delay. Now we're going to make it a lot simpler, and we're just going to run some digital tracks into the tape machine just to change your sound. I send a lot of mixes to the Atari, kind of warms things up. It gives you a bit of a bump in the low end. In this case, I've got a snippet from a song where I decided I liked the instrumentation, but I wanted to send the vocals to the tape machine to smooth off the high end a little bit. I also wanted to send the drums to the tape machine to get a little bit of a low end bump and just some body. So let me show you how I'll do that and get the files back in to kind of marry the two worlds of, having some digital files working side by side with the tape, files, utilizing the FreqInOut. So first thing we need to do on the plugin is we need to make sure that we group the first and second channels and link them together since we're using a stereo tape machine. We also just need to turn on port 1. So if I solo the drums, that's the digital pass. And now we're hearing the files to the tape machine. Now, one thing, I'm looking at the send to the tape machine and the level's pretty low. So we want to get a little bit more drive from the drums going to the tape, and also want to fight with the noise floor so that things aren't getting too noisy. So we're going to utilize the in and the output, input and the output separately on the FreqInOut plugin to drive into the tape machine harder and compensate so that our output's coming back at the same level, but we're driving the tape machine. So keep an eye on the meters on the tape machine. Now we're driving the tape machine harder. We're getting a much better level, fighting that noise floor that's inherent on analog tape, and we're kind of level matching. So I'll go back and forth between the digital sound and the tape sound real quick. One thing I did want to point out real quick, we did kind of a complicated way to do a tape delay, but because the plugin actually has a way to go back and forth between a wet and dry signal, you could just put the FreqInOut and blend in a tape delay if you wanted to. Let me show you real quick. I don't know if it's going to lock up, rhythm-wise, but you can hear what a tape delay would sound like by utilizing the wet and dry mix on the drums. So that was a much easier way to get a tape delay, but I wanted to have some control over the wet and the dry signal in post, so that's the way I did it. But that would be an easy way to get analog delay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over to the tape machine, I'm going to bounce out the vocals, and then I'm going to bounce out the drums, and we're going to actually do it as a real-time bounce in Pro Tools, because it has to actually pass through the tape machine and the analog hardware in real time. So we're going to do a real-time bounce of the vocals with the FreqInOut plugin on that bus, then do the same thing with the drum bus and just do a real-time bounce so that we have those files. So let's switch over. So again, to recap, I liked the instruments in this song. I left them as they are. I wanted them just as a straight digital pass. I wanted to send the vocal stems to the tape machine to roll off some high end and just make them warmer. I also wanted to run the drum bus into the tape machine and hit it a little harder just to get a bit of that, low end head bump from the tape machine, just give them some body. So at this point, I've taken those files that I ran through the tape machine with the FreqInOut. They've done a real-time bounce in Pro Tools, and I've brought the audio files back in. Now, the inherent problem with doing it this way is just time. You've got tape passing from a record head, and in real time, you're recording back off the playback head. So that tape in real time has to travel, and there is a physical time delay between that record head and playback head. So when you bring those files back into Pro Tools or any DAW off the tape machine, they're going to be later. They're not going to be lined up. Now, I've already done tests on my tape machine at 30 IPS, 15 IPS, and 7.5 IPS. So, for instance, I know that at 15 IPS, the time down to the samples between the playback head and the record head at 15 IPS is 7,946 samples. I got that right. I've got it written on there. You've probably seen it, but I know that anything that I pass to that tape machine and bring back into Pro Tools, I need to bring it back 7,946 samples. So it's really simple for me to do this. When I bring the files back into Pro Tools, I just select my drum and my tape, or drum and vocal stems that I sent to the tape machine. Let's see, I hit Option H and I get a pop-up window. And I say that I want to bring those back earlier by 7,946 samples and hit enter. Pro Tools zaps those back 7,946 samples. Now, those taped vocal stems and the taped drum stems will line up with all the other digital stems in that session. So this is something it was a little easier for me to do when I had my API console a few months ago. I could split things off, and I did plenty of sessions where, we'd record all digital, then I'd decide, okay, I want that vocal to tape. And so we would, record the vocal straight to the tape machine, record it back into Pro Tools in real time off the repro head. And then at the end of every single take, I'd have to take that wave file chunk and offset it real quick with Option H. So I got in the habit of doing that, but I think the great way of doing this with the FreqInOut is I can just do it all later and decide what I want to send to the tape machine. I've got control over how hard I hit it inside the plugin, which is really convenient. And again, it's a little bit more difficult to deal with offsets when you have to move something backwards in time. We haven't invented time machines yet, unfortunately. So it's a little bit harder dealing with offsets where you have to bring something back into the digital domain and move it backwards as opposed to forwards. I know Freqport has added in one of their newer updates the ability to offset something in milliseconds. I think you can go up maybe 40 milliseconds. This is off the top of my head. I'd talked to them about maybe having an offset in samples so that people like me that knew the exact sample offset between our record head and playback head, we could set that in a preset in the FreqInOut plugin. And that way, every time we bounce stuff out to tape and brought it back in, it's automatically done that offset for us when you set it manually in the plugin. Unfortunately, the one they have right now isn't even close to being enough for me to use with my tape machine. We're still talking about this. This is something I've gone back and forth, and they've been really good sports because I have all these ideas on how to specifically utilize the FreqInOut for tape specifically. So I've been kind of a jerk with them saying, hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you try this? Like, I've got lots of cool ideas, and I'm not really sure if they're wanting to, do some specific utilization so that people like me can use it for tape machines. But again, like I said in the last segment where we were doing the tape delay, I'm really hoping I can work with them a little bit more and we can come up with some cool ideas to implement this better with tape machines. So again, I have no idea if they're going to do this, but I think there are some cool ways that we could update the plugin in the future and be able to use this specifically for the people like me that enjoy using analog tape. So we'll see what happens. No promises, but at this point, really simple workaround. This is how I've been doing tape stuff for years and in hybrid setup. So it ain't that hard to hit Option H and slam it back 7,000 samples. So not the end of the world, but we'll see what the future holds. So a quick recap before we call it quits. I think I ran through pretty much everything you could with this unit. We talked about utilizing the send and return to kind of drive stuff and level match. Tried the MS option. We did some wet dry stuff. We did some fun stuff with tape. I think that as is, I am extremely happy with the FreqInOut. There's nothing else like it right now. It couldn't have come at a better moment for me because, like I said, I really needed something like this to exist in this moment in time. Sounds great to me. I've been really happy with it because I think there are going to be a lot of people like me that are just in some unique situations where we just straight up need some more inserts and ability to send out to things. Maybe a lot of you with smaller interfaces could use a few more ins and outs. Think it sounds great. I'm not promising anything. I don't work for these guys. They don't pay me, but I'm really hoping that they're going to be open to expanding this technology and coming up with some cool new plugins to expand use cases. I have a ton of cool ideas on how this could, be used just with tape machines and having a dedicated tape plugin that could just do tape things like, giving you options for tape delays and helping with offsets so that everything's lining up when you're bringing taped things back into digital sessions and lots of stuff like that. So I'm hoping that they're going to be open to trying some cool software updates and maybe some standalone plugins. As is, I think it's awesome. It fixed a problem for me. It's got a ton of additional, features in the plugin just right now that I think are going to make it more than just, I need more inserts. There's tons of cool features built into the plugin to make it useful, even if you already have a bunch of inserts and ability to go in and out of a bigger interface. But I'm super happy with the FreqInOut. I think it's going to help a lot of people in situations where you're a little limited. And again, I really hope Freqport's going to be open to doing some expansion on the software end and trying some cool stuff. So we will see what the future holds. I'm going to get back to making some music. Thanks for watching.